Imagine a nation just teetering on the edge, right? Grappling with this massive issue, so fundamental it really threatened to just pull everything apart. You can almost feel the tension in Congress, the whispers, the desperate attempts to find some way forward to stop the slide into disaster. And that, listeners, is where we're heading today. We're doing a deep dive into the Compromise of 1850. You sent us some really great sources, excerpts from the Compromise of 1850, A Nation Divided. Our mission: to unpack how these regional attitudes, especially around slavery's expansion, just completely shaped federal policy after the Mexican-American War. We'll look at the political games, the calls for unity, and the surprising details behind what was essentially a Band-Aid solution, a fix that delayed the conflict, sure, but didn't prevent it.
It's really striking how fast it all blew up. Acquiring all that land from Mexico, it just immediately lit the fuse on the slavery expansion debate. I mean, the fight started before the war was even officially over. You had the Wilmot Proviso, the attempt to ban slavery in any new territory, and its defeat, even though it was narrow, showed just how explosive this was right from the get-go.
Okay, so the land itself sparks this fire. What were the sort of main competing ideas for what should happen in these new territories? How did the different regions see it?
Well, it basically boiled down to three camps. First, you had the Southern position. Pretty straightforward, really. They argued slavery was a constitutional right, full stop. And they pointed to the Missouri Compromise line, the 36° 30 Oriole line, believing it guaranteed slavery below that line. And they wanted that line extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean.
So any restriction was seen as an attack?
Absolutely. An attack on their rights, their economy, their whole social structure.
Then there's the Free Soil movement. And our sources suggest this is, well, maybe a bit more complicated than just anti-slavery.
Exactly. It was a coalition, mostly Northerners, Democrats, and Whigs mixed together. Their main goal was keeping the new territories for free laborers. But, and this is key, it wasn't always purely moral abolitionism driving it. For many, it was about creating a white opportunity, lands free from competition with enslaved labor, yes, but also, importantly, free from competition with free black labor, too.
Okay, so that adds a layer. Some abolitionists were in there, but the main thrust was different.
Precisely. It complicates the picture.
And the third idea, this popular sovereignty.
Right, popular sovereignty. It sounds democratic, doesn't it? Let the people living there decide. Let the settlers vote on whether to allow slavery or not.
Seems like a reasonable middle ground.
You'd think so, but it actually just cranked up the heat. Southerners were terrified settlers might vote against slavery, effectively restricting it, which they saw as, again, an attack. And the Free Soilers, they were worried territories might vote for slavery, expanding the very thing they opposed. So this middle ground just became another battlefield.
No easy answers there.
Not at all. And all this feeds into the situation in the Senate.
Yeah, let's talk about that. The sources really emphasize this incredibly delicate balance, don't they? The perfect tie between slave states and free states.
Critical. Absolutely critical. That balance was precisely why the Wilmot Proviso died in the Senate, even after passing the House, which had more Northern representation based on population.
Okay, so the Senate was the firewall for the South, in a way?
You could say that. And then comes California.
Right, California wants in. And New Mexico's getting organized, too. How does that threaten the balance?
Well, they were expected to enter as free states. And if they did, that perfect Senate balance, gone. Decisively tipped in favor of the Free Starts.
Which must have sent shockwaves through the South.
Huge shockwaves. Suddenly, there's this intense fear, this belief that the North now had the power and maybe the will to eventually abolish slavery everywhere.
And it leads to
open talk of secession, real serious calls to leave the Union. The threat felt existential to them.
A terrifying moment. Who were the main voices pushing for secession?
Yeah.
What was their argument?
You had figures often called fire eaters, very vocal Southern nationalists. They argued the North was trampling the Constitution, ignoring their property rights. They felt backed into a corner.
So in this absolute pressure cooker, how does the idea of a compromise even emerge?
Well, you have figures like Senator Henry Clay stepping up. He was known as the Great Compromiser for a reason. He'd done this before. He puts forward an initial package.
Okay.
Then Stephen Douglas, a younger senator, kind of takes the reins and navigates it through Congress, breaking it into pieces to get it passed.
Did Daniel Webster's role? The sources mentioned his famous speech.
Yes, Webster, a giant figure from Massachusetts. His 7th of March speech was pivotal. He basically urged Northerners to accept the compromise, including the tougher Fugitive Slave Act provisions.
Which must have been incredibly controversial in the North.
Oh, deeply. It alienated many abolitionists who saw it as betrayal, but his support, his willingness to compromise, even on that point, was probably essential to getting the whole package through. You can just feel the weight on these guys trying to hold it all together.
So this Band-Aid, as the sources call it, let's break it down. What were the actual pieces of the Compromise of 1850?
Okay, it was a package, 5 main parts. First, California comes in as a free state. That's a big win for the North.
Right.
Second, the territories of Utah and New Mexico are organized under popular sovereignty, so settlers there get to vote on slavery later.
The controversial middle ground we talked about.
Exactly. Third, the slave trade, not slavery itself, but the buying and selling of enslaved people, is banned in Washington, D.C. A symbolic concession to the North, maybe?
Okay, but slavery itself remained legal in the capital.
Yes, it did.
And then the really contentious part, the one you mentioned Webster had to push for?
Yeah.
The Fugitive Slave Act.
Yes, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This was a major, major concession to the South. It wasn't just a tweak, it was significantly strengthened. It basically required citizens in free states, ordinary people, law enforcement, to actively help capture and return people suspended of escaping slavery.
Actively help.
Actively help. And there were harsh penalties, fines, even jail time for anyone who refused or who aided someone fleeing slavery. The law demanded, as the sources say, it be enforced with vigor.
Wow. You can see how that would cause outrage in the North. It essentially deputized everyone.
It created enormous moral and legal problems. It brought the reality of slavery right onto northern doorsteps in a way that hadn't happened before.
And there was one more piece, something about Texas.
Right, the fifth part. It settled a boundary dispute between Texas and New Mexico. Texas gave up some land claims, and in return, the federal government assumed Texas's large public debt from its time as a republic. Sort of a financial sweetener in the deal.
So a complex package. California free, popular sovereignty elsewhere, D.C. slave trade ban, the harsh Fugitive Slave Act, and the Texas deal.
That's the package. An attempt to give something to almost everyone, hoping it would be enough.
But the sources call it a Band-Aid, forcefully applied. Clearly, it didn't solve the underlying problems. What were the big unintended consequences? How did this temporary fix actually pave the way for more conflict?
Well, that's the crucial takeaway, isn't it? It eased tensions for a moment, maybe bought a decade, but it satisfied almost no one fully. And it definitely sowed seeds for future conflict. Probably the biggest impact was how the strengthened Fugitive Slave Act radicalized people in the North.
How so?
Seeing escaped slaves hunted down in their communities, being legally required to participate, it horrified many who might have previously been indifferent. This directly fueled the abolitionist movement. You saw northern states passing personal liberty laws.
Laws to counteract the federal law.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
State laws designed to obstruct the enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act provide legal protections for accused runaways. And, of course, it spurred much more activity on the Underground Railroad. It presented this terrible moral dilemma.
And did it change how people viewed Congress's ability to handle the slavery issue?
Absolutely. The whole messy, fraught process of getting the compromise passed, the fact that it pleased almost no one, it really reinforced this growing feeling that Congress just couldn't find a real lasting solution. It highlighted the limits of political negotiation when the divisions were so deep, so fundamental. It showed the political system buckling under the strain.
Making a bigger crisis feel almost inevitable.
I think so. It pushed the nation further down the road towards a purely sectional crisis, where compromise seemed less and less possible.
So while it did stop immediate secession in 1850, it didn't fix anything fundamental.
Not at all. It left the core conflict over slavery simmering, maybe even turned up the heat under the surface because of things like the Fugitive Slave Act. It basically just set the stage, cleared some brush, perhaps, for the final confrontation that would erupt into the Civil War only 10 years later.
Okay, so today we really dug into this pivotal moment, the Compromise of 1850. We looked at how a nation deeply divided over slavery tried desperately to stitch itself together. We saw the clash of regional visions, the high-stakes political deals, and the specific measures that formed this precarious agreement.
Yeah, and it serves as this stark reminder, doesn't it? A reminder of just how hard it is to compromise on issues that touch fundamental values, moral, economic, cultural. It really leaves you thinking, you know? How often do attempts to find that middle ground on the really big divisive issues just end up kicking the can down the road, postponing the inevitable instead of actually resolving it? What does looking closely at 1850 tell us, maybe, about the limits or even the dangers of compromise itself?